Now, before I jump into this video, this is not something that I do very often, but I just want to share with people ways that you can support my channel if you wish to do so. If you have a look in the description section for this video, you will find a link for Buy Me a Coffee. That is a independent site where you can buy me a coffee. Well, that's what they call it anyway. It's basically making a bit of support for my channel, putting in a bit of money to support my channel. So it's not like I'm actually getting real coffee out of it. I am getting basically donations that help me towards the costs involved with my channel, and also occasionally help me to spoil my pups. My last payout that I did from Buy Me a Coffee, I used that to buy a few treats for the dogs. So a new dog bed for Amira that she is actually sleeping in right now, so you'll be able to hear the snoring, and a few new jackets for Mouse. Mostly though, when I get money in from Buy Me a Coffee, I do put it back into expenses related to my channel, and also put it towards upgrading my equipment. So as I've mentioned before, my equipment goals at the moment are to get myself a MacBook so I can use that instead of my iPad for working on my YouTube channel. That will allow me to do live streams. And the other thing that I'm looking to invest in, hopefully sometime in the near future, is a new microphone. I have a Rode podcast microphone, which is a very, very heavy microphone. The arm that I have for the microphone is not a Rode podcast arm. It cost me about half of what it would have cost had I purchased a proper Rode microphone arm. So basically, when I'm working, my microphone gradually works its way down towards the desk instead of staying up in the air in front of me, because it's just too heavy for the microphone arm that I've got. There's other expenses that go on in relation to my channel, but there's just a few things. There is also my Patreon account. Now that's something that you can join for free if you are after documents, case documents. However, if you were looking for a way to support my channel, Patreon is another way of supporting my channel. You can sign up for, I think it's like $1 a month or $2 a month or something, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you get a few people doing it, then it does make a difference for me. There is, of course, also super thanks, but in terms of that compared to Buy Me a Coffee, when you do Buy Me a Coffee, I get pretty much everything from that. There is something like a 5% fee, whereas when you do a super thanks, YouTube takes a whopping great chunk out of it. I think it's something like 30 or 40%. Anyway, like I said, it's not something that I normally promote here on my channel. I usually just leave those things there in the description section for my channel. And then, if people see it and they want to contribute, well and good. But it's not something that I normally push. But I thought just this once I would just make mention. Now, I want to welcome all the new subscribers who've been coming in recently. It's great to see more people coming in and supporting my channel. You are wonderful. If you are someone who watches my videos regularly and you are not subscribed, please consider doing so. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, and it's just a way of supporting my channel, because it basically will help my channel grow, and it will also help convince YouTube that my videos are worth recommending to people. Likewise, if you hit the like button, YouTube likes that too, and that also gets my videos out there and seen by more people. Okay, so I've done way too much nattering. So it's time that we got into talking about the blanket yet again. So I'm going to pose a question at the start of this video. And that is this: why would a person feel the need to lie and change their narrative about something if it's insignificant? Why would so many people feel the need to try and change the narrative or feel the need to lie about something if it's insignificant? We've got so many contradictory stories when it comes to the two pieces of blanket. And it's really hard, and it's getting harder to figure out what the truth is. Because as you know, it seems like as soon as we start figuring out something, Daniel throws in a new narrative or a new piece to the narrative. So in this video, there's a number of things that I want to look at and provide clarification. And stick around to the end, because there's one massive, massive lie from Daniel that I can prove is just that, a complete, utter lie. So I did a video the other day where I discussed the new information that we had from the documents, where we had statements from Hayley, Hayden and Hayden's girlfriend Emily with regards to them discovering the blanket. And I used audio from Logan, Cheryl and Hayley also in relation to that. So in this video, I'm not going to go through all the section from the document. I'm not going to go through all the audio from Hayley, Cheryl and Logan. I'm just going to go through the bits that relate to what I'm discussing today. However, I will put the link for the other video in the description section below so that you can go and watch that after this if you've not already had a chance to do so. Now, I am going to pose one more question before we begin. Because while Daniel himself has not at any point that I'm aware of commented on the pink blanket that you can see in the window here, I know when I raised it in my previous video about the blanket that one or two people claimed that it was completely unrelated, and no, it wasn't the same blanket. Even though the colour matches Lily's LOL backpack, and even though this is the only instance when we see this blanket in the window. After that, there is no sign of it. If it is unrelated, then I would like Daniel to provide us with a photo of that exact same blanket to show that we are all wrong. But it does seem like one heck of a coincidence that a piece of blanket is found on a tree, and then this one piece of blanket that was hanging up in a window suddenly is gone from the window in the rest of the photos. Now, before I get to the documents, I just want to read part of an article from the Globe and Mail from August. So I'm starting from the fourth line down. This is about halfway through the whole article, I think. In the mid-afternoon, a non-encrypted radio channel crackled with voices of emergency responders. Families brought us to a location there not far away, that there's a piece of blanket which the mother says she believes belongs to her daughter. Emergency responders dispatched a canine unit to the site where they seized Lily's pink blanket, torn and wound around the lower branches of a spruce. It was about a kilometre from the mobile home off the gravel Lansdowne Road, where Daniel's father and uncles live. The road runs deep, blah, blah, blah. Go on to the next paragraph. When a police officer asked Daniel about the pink blanket, he said it wasn't Lily's at first. Now, before I move on, help me out here. I think Justin may have been asking where the reference to Daniel's car was. And if you go down, we've got, they're talking about Earl's property. And I haven't kept the whole part here because I only wanted to go through the blanket stuff. But down the bottom here, it's got Earl guided police into the yard to old campers and a derelict log cabin filled with junk, and to Daniel's older model black sedan in need of repairs. So let me know who was looking for that so I can just give them a holler, because I do remember someone was talking about it and trying to remember where this reference was. Okay, so moving on to excerpts from the document. This is document 117, I believe. So you have Constables Gagnon, got that name again, and Constable Mason were at Jack and Lily's residence on May 2nd, 2025, around 4 p.m, when Hayley Ferdinand, Hayden Murray Smith and Hayden's girlfriend came out of the woods to say they found a pink blanket in the woods in a tree on Lansdowne Road, not Lansdowne Station Road. They showed a picture to Malaya and Daniel, who confirmed the blanket belonged to Lily. Now, this is ambiguous because it doesn't clarify who they is, whether this is the constables who showed the picture to Malaya and Daniel, or if Emily and company showed the picture to Malaya and Daniel. So that is a little bit ambiguous. Now, grammatically, it should mean that the constables showed the picture to Malaya and Daniel, but we can't expect everybody to have a good grasp of correct grammar. Now, I'm going to take a step backwards for a moment. This is earlier in the documents, and this is from the many statements that Malaya gave. So Malaya talked about Lily's lol doll blanket, and provided the following information. Lily had a lol doll blanket that she sometimes dragged around with her. It was her blanket she used for sleeping before she got an actual bed set, something or other, and she didn't want it anymore. So Daniel used it to stop the draft from the door that wasn't properly installed. Malaya took the blanket from the door because the weather was getting nicer about a week before, and she threw it in the garbage. There was already a piece missing from it when she did that because Daniel ripped it off when he put it up. So here we have Malaya saying that this blanket had been used to stop a draft from a door that wasn't properly installed. And then she says that she, Malaya, took the blanket from the door because the weather was getting nicer about a week before, and she threw it in the garbage. And then she comments that there was already a piece missing from it when she did that because Daniel ripped it off when he put it up. Now, let's talk about the weather, because I checked this really early on in the case. And if you have a look, if you go back and look at the historical weather for May 1st and May 2nd, the overnight temperatures were 1 degrees one night and 2 degrees the following night. Now that is in Celsius. I think that equates to the 40s or 50s in Fahrenheit. But, it's barely above freezing temperature. And apparently the weather was getting nicer, so she took the blanket away from the door. I'm sorry, but if you have ever lived in a climate where you get overnight temperatures that go as low as 1 degrees or 2 degrees, that's fucking freezing. You're not going to be pulling blankets down until the weather gets warmer. The other thing she said here, like I said, she's the one supposedly who took it down. She's the one who supposedly put it in the garbage. And she says the piece was already missing because Daniel ripped it off when he put it up. Now, I'm guessing that he didn't put it up 2 weeks prior to the children going missing, and then Malaya pulled it down a week later. I'm guessing that if it was used to keep out a draft, that it had probably been up there pretty much all of winter. So then, if it had been up there for a while at least, and this piece of blanket, which turned up in a tree, had been ripped off when it was put up, wouldn't you think that would be long gone? Certainly wouldn't be something that would just suddenly appear in a tree. Now, let's go back further on in the document. So the other part of the blanket was seized from Malaya and Daniel's house by Corporal Rice on May the 4th at 9:09 p.m, so 2 days after the blanket was found in the tree. It was located inside a trash bag at the end of the driveway. Next we have an excerpt from Haley's statement. Haley said that Malaya confirmed the blanket belonged to Lily. It was previously used to block a window, and the other half was in a garbage bag. Haley thought, but she heard this from other people. So here we have this heck of a coincidence where Haley, who, if you remember, had been cut off from Malaya for 2 years, hadn't seen Malaya for 2 years, is saying she believes that the blanket was previously used to block a window. Well, isn't that a coincidence? Because we have that image of a window with a pink blanket in it. And then the pink blanket vanishes after the piece of blanket was found in the tree. Now moving on to Hayden's statement, or part thereof. Hayden said he took a photo of the blanket on Emily's phone and went back to show Malaya. Malaya said it might be Lily's, but she threw it out in the garbage. So we have, on one hand, Malaya saying that she threw the blanket itself out in garbage a week earlier, but that the piece of the blanket had been ripped off ages ago when the blanket was first put up. We have Malaya saying the blanket had been used to block a doorway. We have Haley saying that she'd heard that it had been used in a window, and we have a photo of a pink blanket in a window. And then with Malaya saying that she threw the main blanket out about a week ago because the weather was getting warmer. Now, Hayden is saying that she told him she threw that bit of blanket out. Anyway, let's keep moving because it starts getting even more interesting as we go along.
Because it was on the railing, that's what I was told.
But if you were there,
took it from the garbage or in the garbage, it doesn't really
hold
matter.
on. You said about you were like coming in here to correct people about the blanket.
Yes.
And
because it was on the railing, that's what I was told.
But if you were there,
took it from the garbage or in the garbage, I was told it was on the railing. But I really don't know. I don't think it matters. All I know is the blanket was found in the trees up on the road. And I wouldn't even call it half. Just a piece of it. Did I see it on the railing? No. Did I see it in the tree? Yes. Did I see it in the garbage?
No, but the cops know it was in the garbage.
Yeah. No.
I seen it in the tree too. That's why I knew.
You what?
I said I was there when you found it in the tree. Like I was there 2 seconds after you guys found it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, see, when Daniel found out about the blanket in the tree, because he was in the woods before knowing about it, and found out after Malaya left about it, he went out to the garbage because we all mentioned the blanket, So he went out, he goes, I put that blanket in the garbage, I'm going to say about a week ago because it was ripped. So him and I forget who else, I think it was his brother, went out, videoed it all, opening up the garbage and like checking around, and you could see it. So like we called the cops right after that. Like the RCMPs came right out after that. But yeah, it was in the garbage. The RCMPs came out and collected it and all. The bag was still in the garbage bin and the garbage bin was closed.
Okay, I probably should have pre-warned you that it was that audio. But it's interesting what we hear here. So this is where we hear from Cheryl that the blanket was on the railing. And Logan jumps on that straight away and says, no, the blanket was in the garbage. And it seems that Logan has a problem with time distortion, the same sort of problem that Janie has. Because she says that Daniel was in the woods when they found out about the blanket. So he didn't know about it because he'd been in the woods. But he found out after Malaya left. So on one hand, that contradicts the information that we have about him being shown the piece of blanket and saying that's not Lily's, which is information that came directly from the RCMP. And we also have in the documents, it's saying that Daniel was shown the piece of blanket and that him and Malaya confirmed it was Lily's. Missed that part in the document. It doesn't say in the document about him saying it's not Lily's. But what Logan is saying that he was in the woods, so he didn't find out till after Malaya had left. But the blanket was found on the Friday afternoon. Sure, he might have been in the woods then, but then the following day, he was at the property up until the time when him and Malaya went for the briefing. And then during the briefing, she ended up in the ambulance having a panic attack. She left from there. He presumably went back to the house. So there's pretty much a 24-hour gap from when the blanket was found to when Logan is claiming that Daniel finally found out about it. Which, of course, is a complete load of BS. You'll note also that Logan uses some of Daniel's strategies. So when she's talking about Daniel finding out about the piece of blanket, you'll note that she doesn't say that such and such told him about the bit of blanket or such and such sent him a photo of the blanket. She just said when he found out about it. So she's basically not giving full details, which to me says that she's lying here. She's basically stretching out the narrative and doing the Janie thing of putting in bits of time frames into the wrong places. She's trying to fit puzzle pieces in where they don't belong. And then she says Daniel put the blanket in the garbage a week ago because it was ripped. Well, that doesn't match Malaya's story or a week earlier. It doesn't match Malaya's story because she claims she put it in the rubbish a week earlier because the weather had gotten better and it wasn't needed, despite the fact that it was still 1 degree overnight. Logan claims that he put it in the garbage because it was ripped. Malaya claims it got ripped when it was being put up. Their stories are just worlds apart. And then she goes on with the story of Daniel and Justin opening the garbage bag and you could see it in there. And they videoed it. And I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that after we listen to Daniel's audio in a little while. But she says, and then they immediately rang the RCMP, who immediately came out. Well, no, because the RCMP didn't turn up till the 4th. They arrived in the evening of the 4th. It was 9:09 p.m. So if they immediately notified them and they immediately came out, then basically Logan's got even more of an issue with these crazy alternate realities than Janie has, because she's actually merging 3 time frames, in my opinion. Because I have no doubt whatsoever that Daniel was shown a photo of the blanket on the Friday. So this claim that he didn't find out about it because he was in the woods, so he didn't find out about it till after Malaya left. The way she says it implies that he was in the woods from 4 o'clock Friday up until the point in time when Malaya left the property. And we know that's not true. So she's got her story all jumbled up, and it just contradicts the other stories that we've just heard from the documents. It contradicts what is in the report from the Globe and Mail. And there's other contradictions coming up. Now, like I said, some of what has been said here, I'm going to put a pin in it and come back to it, because I want to start with Janie's comments about the blanket.
I cannot answer questions about that blanket because I was not here when it was supposed to be found. I'm just hearing where she said it was. I'm correcting her that it was the Lansdowne Road. The only time that I was here to have any part of the blanket was when the cops, RCMP, came here and asked about the blanket to Daniel. Daniel and Justin did go to the garbage and showed the RCMP officers the rest of the blanket. And I can vouch for the blanket being put in the garbage because I seen the day that Daniel put it in the garbage, because I told him not to bag it too heavy. So Daniel did put the blanket in the garbage.
Now, one of the things that stood out to me here was Janie talking about she wasn't around when the blanket was supposed to be found, which coincidentally is the same thing that she said about the boot prints up on the pipeline. They were supposed to be found. However, thinking it over, she does, after saying when it was supposed to be found, talk about the location and say actually it was Lansdowne Road, not Lansdowne Station Road. But then she goes on to talk about, well, she was there when the RCMP turned up and asked Daniel about the blanket. And him and Justin showed them the rest of the blanket in the garbage. And then she has this story of, I know that, this is truthful, essentially, because I was there when he put it in the rubbish because I told him not to make it too heavy. Adding unnecessary information. That is a complete, utter lie, basically designed to try and be convincing, but instead it's offering up information that's not needed. Now, when it comes to narratives, the way Janie gives her narrative is kind of like a game of pool. The 8-ball hits the other balls and they ricochet off in multiple different directions. There's nothing linear about Janie's narrative. She gets different parts of the timeline muddled up, so things are happening at times when they didn't happen. So, based on her history, I think that when she's saying that she wasn't there when when it was supposed to be found, that she's referring to when Daniel and Justin found the rest of the blanket in the rubbish and took a video of it. Or so Daniel says anyway. But this narrative of taking a video of the blanket when he found it in the bin is a new addition to the narrative. It's never been mentioned by Janie, it wasn't mentioned by Logan, And it was not previously mentioned by Daniel. It's just something that we've only gotten in the last couple of weeks. And it feels to me like there was a part of Dingbat's narrative at one point when people were starting to question all his lies. And he said something along the lines of, you don't have to believe me, but the proof is that there is a sworn statement in court or something. Essentially alluding to the fact that these people have made sworn statements. So what he's saying must be truthful. But of course there's no proof of these sworn statements. And that's what's happening here with Daniel and the rubbish bin. Janie's here saying that the RCMP turned up and asked about the blanket, and Daniel and Justin showed it to them in the rubbish bin. You have Daniel claiming that they found the blanket and they videotaped it and then they let the RCMP know when they came and took the blanket. But Janie's wording makes it sound like that's not how it happened. Her wording makes it sound like the RCMP have gone, okay, we've got part of a blanket, we now need to go back and ask for the rest of the blanket. Daniel, knowing that the blanket is in that bin, has gone, well, I threw it out a week ago. Let me just check. Because you'll note that he's been asked about this video, but he won't produce it. He claims it's because his brother Justin took the video and that Justin doesn't want to be involved in any way, so he can't produce the video. But Justin can pass the video on to Daniel and still not be involved. And if he was the one filming the video, then obviously he's not in the video. So there shouldn't be any obstacle in terms of sharing this video that Daniel claims exists. Unless, of course, it doesn't exist and this is just another made-up part of the narrative. But we've got things out of place here. We've got Malaya saying that she put it in the bin a week earlier because the weather was warmer. You've got Logan saying Daniel put it in the bin because it was ripped. You've got Janie saying, I saw Daniel put it in the bin. I'm just going to add up this completely unnecessary bit of narrative, giving additional information that's not required, because I'm lying. I told him not to make the bag too heavy. A child's blanket. It's not a woolen blanket. It's a synthetic blanket. It would not have been overly heavy at all. Lily was dragging the thing around. The amount of space that a blanket like that would take up in a rubbish bag would actually mean that the bag would be lighter than if it had regular rubbish in it. Now, I could believe Daniel staging it and videotaping them opening the bag and finding the blanket. But at the same time, the way Janie is telling the story here certainly makes it sound like the RCMP turned up and went, okay, well, we've got this piece of blanket. It's not a full blanket. Where's the rest of the blanket? And Daniel has gone, oh, well, we just realised that it's in the bin. We threw it out a week ago. Funny, because Janie says that because of the bears, they never put the rubbish out early. So why suddenly make the exception and throw out a bag of rubbish a week early? The bag of rubbish that conveniently has a blanket in it that was up over a window or a door and was taken down by Malaya or Daniel because either the weather got warmer or the blanket got ripped. We've heard so many instances where Daniel has said in interviews that he's volunteered things, and then we've later found out that actually they were requested of him. The classic one where he said, I offered my phone, and then later on he slips up because he's trying to make Malaya look bad, so he forgets about his previous lie and basically says that the RCMP came and took their phones. You have him claiming that he asked to do a polygraph test. Well, I've said this all along. They're not going to just get someone in to do a polygraph test just because you asked them to do so. It makes no sense. He's just saying that to make himself look important. He's doing the Scott Peterson thing and name-dropping the names of various officers to make it sound like he's buddy-buddy with them. And he has this story of, I even offered to do a drug test, which we now know is a requirement in terms of CPS. He basically had to do Narcotics Anonymous, and it's my understanding that he was also required to do regular drug tests. So I would guess that the true story here is not that him and Justin videotaped finding the blanket, but that in fact RCMP rocked up and said, okay, we realise we've only got part of the blanket here, the rest of the blanket must still be somewhere at the house. You could possibly argue that Janie misspoke, but she repeats the same thing at a different time. I'll just play that for you.
Except for when everybody left and the police officers came and asked Daniel about the pink blanket. I was there when they went out to the garbage can and took the pink blanket out of the garbage. Other than that, after that was over, nobody else was around. Everybody left.
Again, all the balls on that pool table are all over the place. She has said that this happened after everybody left. Everybody left the day before RCMP came and got the blanket. The argument happened on the Saturday afternoon. Everybody cleared out over a day before the RCMP came and got the blanket. But in terms of what she's saying here, again, the way she's saying it, the wording makes it pretty clear that they turned up and wanted the blanket. Not a case of Daniel found the blanket and notified them. And if you're saying you threw the blanket out a week earlier, then why is it that Daniel and Logan make it sound like it was an unexpected discovery to find the blanket in the bin? He's claiming he's the one that threw it out. Logan's claiming he's the one that threw it out. And yet the way the story is being told is that, oh my gosh, look, I found the blanket. It's in the rubbish. How did it get there? Janie quite clearly says that the police officers came and asked Daniel about the pink blanket. She's not saying the police officers came to collect the pink blanket, which is what you would expect given Daniel's story. She's saying they came to ask and asked him about it. And then they went out to the garbage and took the pink blanket. So it seems that this whole finding and videotaping the blanket is a recent introduction that isn't backed up by Logan or Janie's stories. Now recently on that Turkey show, Daniel had a lot to say about the 2 pieces of blanket and the 3rd blanket. So I'm going to go through that.
Interesting. And when are you notified about a blanket? if we're referring to the blanket that was up in the tree, or
right,
just the blanket in general.
Well, let's rewind then. So there's been a lot of confusion that you
Yeah.
had denied that the blanket in the tree was Lily's that ended up being Lily's. Was there another blanket that was found out there?
There is actually another blanket. There's a full pink blanket. I was shown a picture of it, splayed out on the ground. Officer Karen Mason showed me that. She was involved in quite a bit of the, just back and forth stuff between the command center and me and Malaya and Mom and, some of the people involved, and just trying to relay information, keep us up to date and stuff like that.
And this pink blanket that they found, was it something that they found close to the house, or?
I'm not sure the location where it was found. There was a pink blanket. There was a water bottle. There was a children's T-shirt, and there may have been a sock or socks too, showing me as well. But none of them belonged to Lily's, right? I mean, none of them were Lily's. None of them were Jack's.
Do you know if all those items were found at the same place, or were they found throughout?
I'm not sure where they were found. I was just told that, or any of these items, Lily and Jack's, we found them during the search.
Were they photographed together?
No, they were not photographed. They were photographed individually.
Okay, so the most likely then they were not found together.
Yeah.
And around what time was this blanket, the full one that didn't belong to them? When was that one found?
That was found. It would have been during the daytime. So I remember I was actually standing on the front deck when she brought her phone up to show me. So that would have been sometime during the day. So I'm saying between noon and 4 p.m. probably.
So at 4 is when they found the pink blanket that was Lily's. That was a portion of the blanket, correct?
Yeah. I'm not sure on the exact time on that either. It would have to be after 4 because the school bus goes up there around 4 o'clock.
Gotcha. And
because that school bus, it goes up and it actually goes up and turns at my Uncle Ron's house, which is about 500 feet past where the blanket was found.
Gotcha.
So, and the bus usually goes up there, and the bus usually makes its way up there around, I don't know, 3:55, between 3:55 and like 4 o'clock.
And this bus has cameras, correct?
Yeah, the buses do have cameras. When they looked at the footage from the outside of the buses, the blanket was not there.
Interesting. And it went both directions, correct? It went.
Yeah, they go both directions and multiple buses.
And it was not seen at 3:55, 4 o'clock when the bus passed.
No, they said they did not see it on any camera footage from the buses. So
now I'm going to come back to the discussion of the other blanket after going through all the audio that I've got from this particular Turkey interview that relates to the blankets. But I need to stop it here and talk about the buses. So he's really pushing here that the blanket wasn't seen on any of the cameras from any of the buses. And the buses must have gone through before the blanket was found because they go through around 3:55 or 4 p.m. So the buses had gone through before Haley and that found the blanket. So someone must have planted the blanket because it wasn't caught on the bus cameras. And you know what? It was more than one bus. It was multiple buses on a rural road. You have multiple buses, multiple school buses. If you go and look at the bus timetables, you will see that once you start getting into these further out areas, what happens is that the bus will collect students for multiple schools and then they get dropped off at the different schools. There would not have been multiple buses going up Lansdowne Station Road. But it's actually a moot point anyway, because let's just have another look at the documents. This is the statement from Emily, who is Hayden's girlfriend. Now, I'm not going to go through all of it, but we're going to have a look at, if we go right down towards the bottom, and basically we have here that Emily took the photo of the blanket in the tree. And to verify the time frame, they had her look at the data from the photographs that she took. And the data says they were taken at 3:24 p.m. So that's at least half an hour before the buses came through, if there was more than one bus. Now, if we basically have them rocking up back at the house or at wherever it was they went to, where they notified the RCMP that they found this piece of blanket at around 4 o'clock, doesn't matter, because the blanket was definitely there at 3:24 p.m. There is photographic evidence and there is metadata. So Daniel is completely making up this story about how they checked the bus cameras and the blanket wasn't there. Big conspiracy. And they even told Daniel this because, you know, he's part of the investigation. So the blanket was still there when those buses went through, because according to the reports, Haley and That reported it back at around 4 o'clock. Now, obviously, RCMP might have their times wrong, but even if their time is wrong and it was closer to 3:30 when it was reported, at that point in time, the RCMP basically went there to the location. You've got all these things happening before the blanket was finally taken into evidence. So the cameras would have either shown the blanket in the tree, or it would have shown dog handlers in that location or RCMP staff in that location. But like I said, the camera footage is irrelevant because it was found at 3:24 p.m. So in terms of the bus camera footage, A, they're not going to be bothered about whether or not the blanket was there at 4 p.m. because they know it was. And B, they're not going to tell Daniel, oh look, the cameras showed that the blanket wasn't there. Because that's not what the cameras would have shown. The cameras would have either shown that the blanket was there, or the cameras would have shown that there were dog handlers or RCMP staff in that location. So this is a outright lie. Note how elaborate his story was, though. It was multiple buses, and they looked at the footage, and they checked it in both directions because the bus went past in both directions. And yeah, it was multiple buses, and the blanket wasn't there. He just went over the top with explaining this story, which, as we now know, looking at the documents, is just a whole complete utter fabrication.
So around what time were you notified, and how were you notified about the pink blanket that belonged to Lily?
The pink blanket that belonged to Lily, I wasn't notified at all about that. I was actually told there was a piece of a pink blanket that was found up the road in a tree. And I said, piece of a pink blanket? Like, and I put two and two together. I ran out to the garbage bin, and I seen that there was a hole ripped in the bag. And clearly there was somebody who went into the garbage or something went on with the garbage for a piece of that to be ripped out. Because usually when you look in the garbage bin, Daniel, and you see a garbage bag, usually it doesn't have a hand-sized hole ripped in the side of it.
That's interesting. Now, the pink blanket, when they told you about it, did they show you a picture?
The piece of the blanket? No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So they just told you they found a piece. and you went to the garbage bin. And
Yeah.
where in the garbage bin was the bag that had the other part of the blanket? Was it towards the
Okay,
top, in the middle,
there
the
was
bottom?
these were like large industrial sized garbage bags, right?
Okay.
And mom would always yell at me, don't put so much garbage in one bag, because I would always make the bags like really heavy, right?
Okay.
And so I had the blanket was in a garbage bag, but there was another garbage bag that was inside, right? So it was like double bagged.
Interesting.
And you could see I keep wanting to say a hole that was ripped in the side from a hand that went down inside of it and pulled something out, but it looked to be like somebody put their hand in there and ripped it out. But
Now,
the
well,
bag, the blanket was still at the bottom of the bag, right? It wasn't pulled all the way out. It wasn't anything like that. So
was the trash bag in the bottom of the can or on top of like all the other trash?
it was the garbage bag, that one big garbage bag. That was like a 60-pound garbage bag, and it was that was the only bag that was in there.
Oh, okay. So there wasn't
that
any
one.
other trash on top.
No, there was nothing else piled on top of it or underneath it.
So if somebody opened the bin, that's the first thing that they would see.
Yeah, they would be able to see the pink blanket in there. Yeah.
Okay. And so it seems like in the documents that it alludes that they showed you guys a picture and that you guys confirmed it. Was that, if you didn't see a picture, do you know if Malaya did?
I'm not sure if she did or not. I have no idea. Because I actually wasn't present at the house very much during the search, because I was just out in the woods searching, man.
Understood.
Like I poured my heart and soul into just searching as hard as I could.
I can imagine. Weird. I don't understand why somebody would plant evidence that's leading to the direction of a.
I've never actually seen the actual location of the footprint in real life.
Yeah.
So I told investigators this, and I've never seen the actual blanket hanging in the tree. I've never seen that.
Okay, so here's where it starts to get fun. Like I said, I will come back to talking about the second blanket. But he's asked, when were you told about the piece of blanket? And he decides to just confuse the issue by throwing in this extra blanket. He doesn't answer that. And then when this turkey guy goes back to it, he still doesn't give an answer. In fact, he claims that he was never told about the piece of blanket. He claims he was never shown the piece of blanket. And then when he finally gets around to talking about the piece of blanket, he basically says that, when he was told about it, he's like, and I said, which is not natural speech, that he's showing us straight up that this too is nothing more than a made-up narrative. The way he was so fake about and I said, piece of a pink blanket. So here, in this version of the story, he's been told that they found this piece of a pink blanket. And he was like, piece of a pink blanket? And he dashed and he checked the rubbish bag down by the road. And you know what? Well, bugger me, there was a hole the size of someone's hand in that bag. And it was so clear that someone had ripped a piece of that blanket out of that garbage bag. And they must have been the ones that planted it. And he says 3 times, or he refers 3 times to basically someone essentially ripping a hole and ripping off the piece of blanket. And he's going all out with the persuasive language. Clearly, somebody went into the garbage. And then he's describing it as a hand-sized hole. And then he keeps pushing this story. There was a hole in the side of the bag where a hand went in and pulled something out. And it looked like somebody had put a hand in there and ripped it out. But see, here's the problem. Because you have a statement from Malaya saying that the blanket was ripped when it was originally put up over the window or door, depending on your take on it. So now he's claiming that actually it was ripped while it was in the garbage. And we know that there were actually only 2 pieces of that blanket, and they matched them up, meaning there weren't other pieces of the blanket missing. The blanket was only in 2 pieces, not 3 pieces. You also have Daniel claiming that he threw the blanket out because it was ripped. But now, according to Daniel, the blanket was in the bin and someone ripped it while it was in the bin. Well, that's interesting, because at the same time he's talking about the bag being double bagged, although when he talks about someone putting a hole in it, he put a hole in the bag, not both bags, the bag. So at the time when someone put their hand through it and ripped out the piece of blanket, there was actually only one bag. So the other bag must be like one of these ones that appears and disappears. And you see where he's really, really pleased with himself, because he managed to remember Janie's story. He throws in the bit about the bags being massive. It was an industrial-sized bag. And Janie yelled at him, "Don't put so much stuff in the bag." Which confuses me no end, because according to Janie, what goes on in that trailer has nothing to do with her, and she doesn't actually go into the trailer. But apparently she just happened to be there in the house at the very moment that Daniel was throwing that blanket out, even though Malaya claims that she threw it out. So apparently Janie, who stays out of their lives, just happened to be there to witness this blanket being thrown in the bin. In the bin with 2 bags, although when it was pulled out there was only 1 bag. Now apparently these are industrial sized bags, and they take like 60 pounds. But they're see-through. Honestly, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but when you talk about bags that size, then they're not see-through. They're a pretty heavy-duty plastic. So for those of you who speak metric, 60 pounds is roughly 27 kilograms. So that is pretty hefty. That is a massive bag. There's no way a bag that size is going to be see-through, unless Canada does weird things. In Australia, if you get a bag that size, it's not see-through, I can assure you. But according to Daniel, because there was only the 1 bag in the bin, if you opened the bin, you'd be able to see the pink blanket. The pink blanket that was in the bottom of the bag. So apparently you have a see-through 60-pound bag, and all the rubbish in the top portion of the bag is also see-through. Because when you think about that bin, now I'm going with a photo from late May, because you can see behind him that the bin's actually broken by then. I don't know what happened to the bin, but it looks like someone had a bit of a tantrum and decided to destroy the bin. But that's convenient for us because you can see that the bin is split. There's 2 sides to it. If you stick a 40-pound bag in that bin, there's no way you are going to see what is in the bottom of that bin. The bag is going to take up a large portion of one side of that bin. It's going to be hidden by the edges of the bin. So no, you're not going to see the blanket in the very bottom of the bin. just from opening it and looking in. But it seems like he's gotten so excited by his story of somebody actually reaching into the bin and ripping off a piece of the blanket and then planting it on a tree that he forgot that Malaya said the blanket was ripped before it even went up. He forgot that he said he threw the blanket out a week earlier because it was ripped. Now he's claiming that the blanket was intact and someone just broke into the bag. They happened to open the lid of this bin and they managed to look in there and see through the see-through heavy industrial bag and through all the see-through rubbish that was also in that heavy industrial bag and see the blanket in the very bottom and rip a hole in the side of that bag. Well, that would also be bloody difficult to do because you would have to pretty much climb into that bin to be able to rip a hole in the side. You would have to pretty much climb into that bin to see what was in the bottom of the bag. So it makes no sense whatsoever. Especially given that up until he got on this turkey show, we were all led to believe that that piece of the blanket had come off long ago. Now, the other thing that I'm having problems with here is the claim that the blanket had been thrown out a week earlier. The blanket was thrown out in an industrial size bag a week earlier, and that was the only bag in the rubbish. Now, I've already said that Janie claims that in terms of putting rubbish out there, she wouldn't put it out there early. They're talking about having a bear in the area and they're going to leave rubbish out in the bin for a week. No, that's not a bear-proof bin. We don't have bears in Australia. But I've learnt about these things thanks to the Kylie Rodney case. Because they have bears in California too. If that bin was a bear-proof bin, then it would be locked. You know, people in the Tahoe region actually have to lock their cars to make sure that bears don't get into their cars. If you don't have a bear-proof bin, the bear will open the bin and help themselves. Apparently, he needed to make sure that the front door was wedged shut to keep the bear from getting into the house. But chucking rubbish out in the bin, leaving it there for a week, no problems, not worried about a bear. But moving beyond that, here's the next issue I have with this claim of throwing the blanket out a week earlier. Now, I've blown this up a bit so you can see it more easily, but this is actually April of this year. And you can see that a week prior to the 2nd of May would have been the 25th of April. Now, why am I using this particular map? Well, Pictou County, just like Bendigo here, has a page that you can go to check when your rubbish day is, so that you can make sure that you get your rubbish out in time, that you put your rubbish out on the right day. So rubbish collection for 1407 Gairloch Road, and this is specifically for 1407 Gairloch Road because it gives you the option. You can put in, you type in the address and it'll give you your own calendar. rubbish collection for 1407 Gairloch Road was the 22nd of April. So why is that significant? Well, he's saying that they put the blanket in the bin a week earlier, which would make it roughly the 25th of April. And that was in that big industrial-sized 40-pound bag. And that's the only bag in there. So their rubbish was collected on the 22nd. And yet in the space of 3 days, they managed to fill up one big industrial size bag. 27 kilos worth of rubbish. Well, wouldn't have weighed 27 kilo, but you know what I mean. Massive bag. They filled that up within 3 days. Now, I've already said the blanket would have been a flimsy one. If you look at the Lowell blankets online, they are those lightweight synthetic ones. It was one that Lily would drag around. It wasn't big. So it wasn't going to take up a huge amount of the bag. So in 3 days, they filled up a massive, massive industrial-sized bag. But in the following 7 days, in fact, 9 days, because basically the blanket was collected on the 4th. So in the following 9 days, they had no more rubbish. Even though on the 2nd and the 3rd, they had a family reunion in the trailer where Cindy and Malaya's family were all apparently having a feast that Janie wasn't invited to. So even if we take into account that probably after the 3rd, that one extra day after the 3rd, there probably wasn't a lot more rubbish. Are you going to tell me that in the space of 3 days, roughly, they managed to fill up an industrial-sized rubbish bag, but then for the next 9 days after that, they didn't manage to fill up any bags? Make that make sense. Of course, when I look at this, the thing that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies a bit is that had the RCMP turned up another 2 days later, maybe 3 days later, depends on what time the rubbish removal is, then that blanket may have been gone. But the story of someone opening up that bin, seeing the blanket, making a hole in the side and ripping a bit out, doesn't fit. The story of being able to see through an industrial size rubbish bag doesn't fit. And the claim that the blanket was thrown out a week earlier in this industrial sized rubbish bag, meaning that they managed to fill up that massive bag in 3 days, but then in the subsequent 9 days didn't fill up any more bags. Make that make sense. Like I said, I'm going to come back to the story of the second blanket momentarily. Well, I'm still not finished with the piece of blanket. We know there was only 2 pieces of blanket, the larger piece and the piece that was recovered from the tree. There wasn't a third piece. They matched it on the blanket and concluded that it was the same blanket. They didn't match it and go, oh look, there's a hole where there's another piece missing. And we were given a narrative from Malaya about the blanket being ripped before it was put up. We were given an alternative version if we didn't like that one, where instead the blanket became ripped so it got thrown out. We have this suggestion from Cheryl that the blanket was over a railing as opposed to in the bin. Something that Logan argued against and said, no, the blanket was in the bin. So much confusion over where the blanket was and where the bits of the blanket were. Well, someone sent me an email this morning, and I'm going to play you a bit of audio from a channel that I can't remember what it's called. It's that Charmaine, who apparently used to be on Sunny's channel, and now she has a channel of her own. If you like Sunny's style of live streams, then maybe her channel is for you. I will warn you, she is pro Daniel and communicates with him behind the scenes, apparently. So in terms of if you were wanting to check out her channel, they're the two things to be aware of. Her channel is very, very much like Sunny's, like the live stream style that Sunny has, and she is pro Daniel. So I'm going to play a small clip from a live stream that she did yesterday. Now, earlier in her live stream, she claimed that she no longer shows screenshots because she's learnt from that. I don't know what that means, because that's the first time I've ever actually checked out her channel. So I don't know what the history is there. So what we're hearing here is hearsay, meaning that she is telling her audience what Daniel has allegedly told her. But it's interesting, so I thought I would play it for you.
Daniel has admitted to me, not admitted to me, but told me that the blanket was, the piece of blanket was indeed on the railing outside. And the bigger chunk of that blanket was in the garbage bag. Not sure how the rip in the bag comes into play.
Okay, so a little bit of leakage there. And instead of trying to just keep going and hope that people didn't really notice what you were saying, she backtracked and made it more obvious. So she said, Daniel admitted to me. And then she backtracks and goes, not admitted, he told me. Because when you say someone admitted something to you, that is basically saying they said they were guilty. It's an admission of guilt. Grammatically, when you say someone admitted to something, it means that they are guilty of something. It means they are confessing to something. And she's saying that Daniel admitted to her that the piece of blanket was over the railing. The rest of the blanket was in the rubbish. And she doesn't know where the hole in the bag comes into play then. It's not just about the hole in the bag, it's about the entire story of him checking and discovering that there was a hand-sized hole in the bag, which he told us about 20 million times. It's about him working really, really hard to establish this idea that someone certainly went into that rubbish bag and ripped off a piece of the blanket. He really, really pushed that narrative in his Turkey interview. And now, according to this Charmaine, he's admitted to her that actually the piece of the blanket was on the railing. That also doesn't fit with the narrative of it was ripped when the blanket first went up, or he threw the blanket out because it was ripped. If you threw it out because it was ripped, you would throw both parts out. As for it being over the railing, the story's a bit muddled there, because the version that Cheryl was giving was that the blanket, the full piece of blanket, was over the railing, not in the rubbish. She wasn't saying the piece that was discovered in the tree was seen over the railing. But what Daniel has done is something that he does quite often, and that is he's taken someone's argument that has been used to prove his lie and he's twisted it around to create a new narrative. People have been focusing quite a lot on the blanket lately. And Daniel's been pushing hard to convince people that someone from Malaya's family planted the piece of blanket out there on Lansdowne Road. Now, I suspect that people have basically pointed out how ridiculous the story is of someone ripping the bit of blanket out of the rubbish bag. So he's decided to steal that story about the blanket being over the railing, but instead of it being the entire blanket over the railing, it's just a little piece of blanket over the railing. Like I said, when you look at it logically, that bag with the blanket in it did not go into the rubbish a week earlier. That bag with that blanket in it, I'm willing to bet, went in there after the discovery of the piece of blanket on the tree. They've all scrambled for some reason to come up with stories to explain away this piece of blanket on the tree. And somehow this blanket that it connects with was in the bin. But of course it was only put there a week earlier. It wasn't put there just then. Like I said at the beginning of the video, why the need to lie so much about this one object? Why are they trying so hard to push their narratives? Their narratives that none of which actually match. I've heard people talking about seeing the blanket over the railing in a photo. I've looked through all the photos I have of the property and I can't find any that have the blanket over the railing. But I just find it interesting that we have this story originally coming from Cheryl saying that she was told by someone that they saw that blanket over the railing. And then Daniel is all of a sudden adopting the story of the blanket over the railing to explain the piece of blanket based on Daniel's past performance and also based on simple logic. That says to me that the blanket, the main piece of blanket, actually was originally over the railing at some point in time and that somebody spotted it. I'm going to guess that it was probably Hayden. Hayley was working. She didn't turn up till later. But Hayden and Emily went there with Paddy early on. They were woken up apparently by Malaya saying that the children were missing. So they would have been one of the first lot of people there. So perhaps they saw it over the railing. Maybe they saw it over the railing after it was removed from the window and before it was put in the bin. But to me, the fact that everyone is lying so much about the two pieces of blanket says that they actually are significant somehow. Otherwise, why would you be concerned? That tells me that that piece of blanket on the tree wasn't planted. It wasn't meant to be there. Now, I'm going to go back to this second blanket because that is an incredibly impressive story from Daniel. He gives us so much detail. This time he was shown a photo and he can tell us the exact location. He was standing out the front of the house on the veranda, on the porch, whatever you want to call it. And it was Constable Mason who went up to him and showed him, and he starts saying "the," and then he corrects himself and says "on her phone." So I think in his head, he was going to have her show him the blanket. And then he probably realised that, oh no, that doesn't work in my narrative. And I'll tell you why I know that this is a narrative shortly. But he's certainly being very descriptive. The blanket was laid out on the ground and photographed. Well, when you photograph something that you have discovered that may have evidentiary value, you don't lay it out on the ground. You photograph it in situ, and then you place it in an evidence bag. Because if there are any fibres or anything on that blanket which could be of forensic value, and you lay that blanket out on the ground, you may have just lost a bunch of forensic evidence. That blanket, that non-existent blanket, I might add, would have been photographed from multiple angles in the exact position where it was located, and then it would have been carefully extricated by a few people, because someone would have been holding open that good old brown paper bag, while someone else, wearing gloves, would have carefully collected that blanket and put it into the paper bag. There is no point in time when you are going to lay out a piece of evidence that you have discovered on the ground. Now, to use Justin's words, there's usually a nugget of truth in things like this. And I think in this story, he's actually, once again, mixing up his timeline. Seems to be a thing with this family, that they borrow parts of their timeline and insert them in different spots. So this description of, it must have been between 12 and 4, Constable Mason came and I was standing outside, and she came and she showed me a photo on her phone, and I was like, no, that's not Lily's blanket. Or he said that in an odd way, which was also a dead giveaway. To me, that sounds, because of, it is a linear description, it is a logical description. So he has taken something that he experienced and inserted it into this new story. Essentially, he's just admitted here that yes, he was shown a photo of the piece of blanket hanging in the tree. The way he told that part of the narrative was definitely him explaining an actual event, but it doesn't belong with the imaginary blanket. So he's definitely told us here that yes, he was showed an image of the blanket in the tree. And we have references to that, including the reference where we are told that he said, no, that's not a piece of Lily's blanket. And in the past, one of his excuses for that was, oh, because I knew that the blanket was in the bin. Now, also, if you watched my Chris Watts video, you probably know all Daniels tells by now. The tongue, the lizard tongue, basically sticking out, licking the lips. At one stage, he even put his hand up and was touching his face. We had a lot of duper's delight there. There were so many signs throughout this whole conversation that he was lying. And he overemphasises things. He goes overboard with some of the information that he's given. Including when he says, I've never seen the actual blanket hanging in the tree. I believe him at that, in that he wouldn't have seen it hanging in the tree, because I think had he done so, he would have got it off there pretty damn quickly before anyone else could see it. But he was shown a photograph of that blanket hanging in the tree. Now, I could point out many, many, many things about this imaginary blanket that show that it is a completely fictitious story. I will point out that it is just commonly known that you should never trust someone who is a narc, someone who is addicted to drugs, because they are very good at coming up with elaborate stories to hide their addiction. Seems that Daniel has had a lot of practice at coming up with elaborate stories. Because honestly, if you didn't have other sources of reference and you only listened to that story, maybe you could believe him that there was a second blanket. But if you do your research, if you look at the documents, if you listen to all the statements that were made beforehand, then you know that this is a brand new story and a complete fabrication. Now, like I said, I could go into so much more in terms of this imaginary blanket. I could go through all his body language while he's talking about it and show you all the different things that he does. I could analyse the speech while he's talking about it and show you all the tells in his speech that show that it is pure fiction. But I'm going to take a shortcut, because I think, like many of you, I'm just over Daniel's lies. I'm over the continually changing the story, creating a new narrative anytime someone calls him out. Anytime he gets caught in a lie, he changes the narrative. So I took a shortcut. I couldn't be bothered spending all this time over this fake blanket. Although admittedly I have spent a bit of time in this video. I think more to the point, like I said, I'm just fed up with Daniel's lies. I'm fed up with him changing the narrative anytime he gets caught out in a lie. I'm fed up with him making up new stories. So I did the logical thing and I emailed the RCMP. And I'll read it to you. Hello again. I was hoping you could provide some clarification to clear up some confusion. Based on the dispatch audio, and according to the documents, there was only one blanket. One piece was found in the tree, the other was retrieved from in the garbage 2 days later by RCMP. There are now claims being made that a second blanket was found. Another one that was also pink and was found spread out on the ground somewhere. Can you, if possible, please clarify if there was one blanket or two found? Now, I just want to point out that you've seen some of Alison's work before. It's her job to obfuscate when necessary, to basically give people an answer without giving them an answer. So she could have given the standard reply of, we are unable to disclose what evidence was collected by investigators. Meaning, we can't tell you this. Sorry, this question is above your pay grade. But that's not the reply I got. Hi there. 2 sections of blanket were recovered by investigators. They're believed to be part of one blanket. That is, the section that was in the tree and the section that was retrieved from the rubbish. I'm just adding that in to clarify for anyone who may not quite figure out what 2 sections of blanket means. There was no extra blanket. That is pure fiction made up by Daniel. I believe that was done so because of people pointing out the blanket in the window of the house. So I'm going to leave you with the same question that I asked at the beginning. Before I do, I just want to say thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. I would love to try and reach 7,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Also, please hit the like button, get this video out there into the algorithm, and please leave a comment below. Now, here's that question that I asked at the beginning for you to consider. Why would a person feel the need to lie and change their narrative about something if it's insignificant? Why are there so many contradictory stories with regards to the 2 pieces of blanket? Why, and this is an add-on, did Daniel choose to introduce an imaginary blanket? So, on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.